The 1960s were an era of big cars, big dreams, and let's face it, even bigger blunders. While Detroit's Big Three were busy crafting muscle car legends and luxury cruisers, they also rolled out some true automotive disasters. If you lived through the 60s, you'd know that not every classic was a hit. Buckle up as we dive into the decade's most overhyped rides, cars that America would rather leave in the rearview mirror. Number 10. AMC Marlin, 1965 to 67. The AMC Marlin was intended to be AMC's response to the fastback craze. Although it appeared to be a sleek shark on wheels, it was actually more like a goldfish under the hood. AMC marketed the Marlin as a personal luxury car with sporting ambitions, but it had an identity struggle from the start. Was it a sporty car? A family cruiser? Even the engineers were unsure. You're cruising down the highway in your Marlin, expecting a spectacular ride, but the handling feels more like piloting a boat through Jell-O. The style was striking, perhaps a little too bold with that long sloping back end that made onlookers wonder if it had been stretched accidentally. The Marlin's performance wasn't horrible, but it was far from what the flamboyant design promised. The car failed to meet everyone's expectations and ended up being average. Overhyped? Absolutely. Memorable? Definitely, but not for the correct reasons. Number 9. Buick Riviera. The Buick Riviera made its debut in the early 1960s, attempting to dethrone the reigning monarch of personal luxury coupes, the Ford Thunderbird. The Riviera, with its dramatic egg crate grille and sharply creased lines running across the front and rear quarters, was more than just a car. It was a statement. Imagine driving up to a swanky downtown event in one of these. Its striking presence would be tough to ignore. Inside, Buick spared no expense in providing luxury. Plush seats, polished wood trims, and cutting-edge controls for the time made the Riviera feel more like a private lounge on wheels than a conventional coupe. This was more than simply a car. It represented a new level of refinement and sophistication for discerning drivers. From 1963 to 1965, the first-generation Riviera wowed consumers with its attractive look and opulent interior. Word immediately spread that there was a new player in town, and the figures back it up. More than 112,000 units sold in just 3 years. For those who were fortunate enough to buy one, the Riviera was more than just a vehicle. It was a rolling symbol of luxury and prestige in mid-century America. Number 8. Cadillac El Dorado. The Cadillac El Dorado was designed to represent the pinnacle of elegance and performance. It was designed during the 1960s, a golden era when General Motors was essentially the monarch of the automotive world, bursting with riches and ambition. The El Dorado was their crown jewel, with amenities that made you feel like royalty, if royalty wanted to sail down the boulevard in a nearly 19-foot-long land yacht. The El Dorado was available as a two-door Seville coupe, a sedan Brauman, hand-built in Italy, and the flamboyant Biarritz convertible. So there was something for everyone. Well, everyone who had money. The car was expensive, but that did not stop people from screaming for it. Why shouldn't they? It was glistening with chrome, had enough room for a small hamlet, and had more horsepower under the hood than your typical muscle vehicle. Despite its opulence, the El Dorado was also a symbol of extravagance. Sure, it looked great in your driveway, but what about parking it? Good luck. Let's not even talk about fuel efficiency. It guzzled gas like a thirsty elephant at a watering hole. Number 7. Jeep Wagoner. The Jeep Wagoner was first developed in 1959, but it took a long time to perfect, much like a slow-cooked barbecue. It wasn't until 1962 that Jeep thought the world was ready for what they called America's first luxury 4x4. And let's be honest, the hype was real. Jeep touted that the Wagoneer's cargo compartment was large enough to accommodate a 7-foot ladder, lying flat no less. Who knew an oddly narrow selling pitch could be so appealing? Beyond freight bragging rights, the Wagoner lived up to its luxury name, providing a smooth, pleasant ride that outperformed comparable utility cars. It became popular with everyone, from suburban families to tough outdoorsmen, demonstrating that luxury and utility could coexist. The Wagoneer's true legacy, however, lay with the Jeep Cherokee. which absorbed its genes and went on to become a legend in its own right. It's reasonable to assume that without the Wagoneer's success, the Cherokee would never have become the symbol it is today, a car that you still see everywhere, despite its problematic parking abilities. Number 6. Ford Thunderbird. The Ford Thunderbird dominated the 1960s as the go-to luxury coupe, basking in its spotlight until the Buick Riviera stepped in to steal some thunder. Production began in 1957, and by 1960, Ford reasoned, why fix what isn't broken? So they essentially kept everything the same, save for adding a dazzling third taillight at the back because nothing shouts luxury like a few extra bulbs. But hey, it works. The 1960 model year set a record with nearly 92,000 Thunderbirds leaving the lot. As the decade progressed, Ford couldn't stop tinkering. By 1969, we'd seen 3 more Thunderbird versions, each with its own set of changes ranging from stylish to downright huge. It seemed as if Ford was always asking itself, what happens if we add more size and chrome? What was the result? A once glamorous bird is gradually evolving into a land yacht. Despite its popularity, the Thunderbird's growth was a mixed bag. Sometimes a symbol of style, a cautionary story of more is less. But hey, it's difficult to remain timeless when your main selling point is a third taillight. Number 5. Pontiac GTO. The Pontiac GTO was the car that fueled the muscle car craze that swept throughout America in the 1960s and early 1970s. The GTO designation, inspired by Ferrari, may sound sophisticated, but in English it simply means homologated for racing in the GT series. While it may appear out of reach for most drivers, Pontiac had other ideas. When the GTO debuted in 1964, it was not a standalone vehicle, but rather an option package for the Pontiac Le Mans. But this was no average add-on. It came equipped with a 325 horsepower V8 engine that roared at 4,800 RPMs and was designed to offer unadulterated power. People adored it. The GTO's combination of raw power and street appeal struck a chord, and before you knew it, this car, that had began as an extra, had evolved into its beast. It grew into its model, becoming a formidable competitor in the muscle car industry. The GTO represented brawn, speed, and the attitude of the day. It was more than simply a car. It represented performance and independence, ushering in the golden age of American muscle. Number 4. Dodge Charger. The first Charger debuted as a display car in 1964 before going into production for the 1966 model year. The car, based on the Dodge Coronet, began life on unstable ground, and low sales threatened to ruin the entire project. The story altered, however, with the release of the 1968 model. A design revamp catapulted the Charger to become one of the best-looking muscle cars of the 1960s. Dodge had planned to produce 35,000 units, but as the car's popularity grew, production increased to almost 96,000. Number 3. Lincoln Continental. Before 1961, Ford had distinct divisions for Lincoln and Continental. However, many resources had been devoted in the 1950s to combat the recession and Cadillac's onslaught. In 1961, Ford officials decided to combine the two departments and develop a single model, the Lincoln Continental. It was a high-risk venture, but it eventually paid off. The automobile launched as a four-door coupe or convertible, and its flowing body lines influenced future car styles for decades. During its peak, the automobile was so popular that President John F. Kennedy famously drove one. Number 2. Chevrolet Camaro. The Camaro was more than just General Motors' quick response to the Mustang's growing popularity. The early Camaro vehicles were clones of Chevrolet Novas, copying several parts and mechanical underpinnings. The automobile began on the market in 1966 with 220,000 units sold that year. An outstanding figure until you consider the 480,000 Mustangs sold throughout the same era. The Camaro's popularity, on the other hand, grew steadily, aided in part by the car's engagement in racing, and by the end of the decade, it was one of the most popular vehicles available. Number 1. Ford Mustang. In terms of automobiles, the The Mustang's launch was arguably the most significant of the 1960s. The car debuted with a boom at the 1964 New York World's Fair, and the Mustang nameplate has evolved to match industry demands till today. The tall hood and short deck profile wowed the car world at first glance. It provided a high level of power and performance at an affordable price. Ford could barely keep up with demand. They expected to sell 100,000 copies in the first year, but they met that objective just 3 months after their debut. By the end of 1969, the assembly factories had produced a staggering 2 million units. Thanks for taking this wild ride down memory lane with us. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for the latest updates. We've got plenty more stories, surprises, and nostalgia coming your way, so stay tuned.